Howdy folks, and welcome to the first episode of Mingles with Jingles of 2019. Wow, 2019. It's been a week already. My, how time flies. So, what sort of things can we expect the year to bring us? Well, aside from, hopefully, Cyberpunk 2077 and the Subnautica Below Zero game, which is due to go into alpha for God knows how long, within a couple of months. There are some big changes on the horizon for World of Tanks and World of Warships as well. Now, I did touch briefly on some of the upcoming changes to World of Tanks in the World of Tanks video that I did last week. But before we take a look at them in slightly greater detail, I think it's important that you put this whole situation into perspective. Now, I don't know if you can remember, but towards the end of last year I made the statement, and I think it was in an episode of Mingles with Jingles, I can't remember which one, that it was my belief, and I had absolutely no facts or figures or statistics to back this up, that World of Tanks had plateaued, that it was no longer growing, and while I didn't necessarily say that I thought the game's player numbers were in decline, I certainly didn't believe that they were getting any bigger, and in fact had levelled off. And the reason that I made that claim, if claim is the right word, is because of the way World of Tanks has been aggressively monetising everything they could lay their hands on. Now, typically, at least in my experience, you don't really tend to see a games publisher milking their player base for every penny they can squeeze out of them unless they're Electronic Arts, Blizzard Activision, Ubisoft, 2K Games, Warner Brothers, or unless the game is no longer bringing in as much money as it was because it's no longer growing its player base. The game has plateaued. And again, while I didn't have any specific facts or figures to back up the feeling that I had that this was the case with World of Tanks, other than the way that World of Tanks had been monetising everything that wasn't nailed down over the course of the preceding year, Quickybaby did have facts and figures, and in fact published a video a couple of weeks ago going into the numbers. And it turns out that World of Tanks hasn't actually plateaued. It's in decline, and has been for about a year. And not just on the EU server, although I believe the numbers are more pronounced on the EU server. And the thing is, Christmas 2017 actually saw some pretty substantial growth in World of Tanks. Mostly because, at least in Quickybaby's opinion, and I'm inclined to agree with him, World of Tanks 2017 Christmas was really good for World of Tanks. There was a fantastic special event going on, there were all kinds of good things. Fast forward 1 year to Christmas 2018, just a couple of weeks ago, and the global World of Tanks player base has been in fairly steady decline since the previous Christmas, and 2018's Christmas event was basically just a loot box lottery extravaganza, where depending on how many hundreds of euros you were prepared to throw at wargaming, you might get lucky and get an IS-3A, a tank that in its original incarnation was a fairly meh Tier 8 premium, but just in time to make people put their hands in their pockets for Christmas. It was revamped with the most ridiculously brokenly overpowered auto-reloading mechanic ever to disgrace a computer game. However, at about the same time, Wargaming announced big plans for 2019 as far as World of Tanks was concerned. And if you care about World of Tanks and you haven't yet seen Quickybaby's 2 videos on this subject, I do recommend you go and watch them because he's really done his homework on this subject. With the announced plans for 2019, there did appear to be plenty of reason to get hopeful about the future of World of Tanks. Reading between the lines, you might be forgiven for thinking that Wargaming have acknowledged that the game has problems, and rather than simply trying to continue to milk the player base for every penny they can squeeze out of them, they're instead trying to actually deal with some of the problems that have led to people leaving the game in larger numbers than ever before. And again, you have to keep this in perspective. Just because the player base has declined doesn't mean that World of Tanks is dying overnight. It's still huge. It's just not as big as it used to be, and the numbers are going down rather than up. And you kind of have to give credit where credit's due here, because a lot of other games publishers would have simply cut back on development in order to save costs, and aggressively increased the way that they monetized the game. Just minimise their costs and maximise their income for as long as it lasts. And that's not what they're trying to do. They do have some fairly big plans for 2019, including but not limited to solving some substantial issues with the Matchmaker. Now, this is not the first time, in fact it's not even the second time this particular train has left the station. In 2018, in patch 9.18, they introduced the infamous 357 Matchmaker. Now, that Matchmaker does get a fair amount of flack, and it deserves it, but it was, you have to admit, better than what preceded it. Now, I'm by no means saying that the 357 Matchmaker was a great system. For those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, 3 tier 10s, 5 tier 9s, 7 tier 8s, or, adjust the tiers accordingly, but 3 top tier, 5 mid tier, 7 bottom tier tanks on each team. That's, in essence, what the 357 Matchmaker is, and it did solve a couple of problems which had existed. Primarily, we're talking at tier 8. Because it wasn't that long ago when it was not unusual, if you picked a tier 8 tank, to find yourself one of only 2 tier 8 tanks on your team in a tier 10 battle. And you can imagine how much fun that was going to be. Well, that went away with the 357 Matchmaker, but it kind of introduced a whole bunch of new problems. Chief amongst them being that between tiers 5 and 8 you tended to spend most of your matches at the bottom of the matchmaking spread, some of your matches in the middle of the matchmaking spread, and very few of your matches at the top of the matchmaking spread. And funnily enough, this wasn't a whole lot of fun for people either. So how are they going to fix this? God knows. They've announced a couple of tentative plans, but it's at least encouraging that they've acknowledged that there is a problem, it does still need work, they're attempting to fix it, and they're not just sticking their fingers in their ears saying, no, shut up, you're all stupid, the matchmaking system is fine, get over it, oh, and by the way, buy some premium account time. Next up, they've announced the return of the very popular Frontline mode, and apparently it's coming soon in the first quarter of 2019. And it's going to happen a lot more often as well. They're going to have a Frontline mode active every month for a week at the beginning of the month. And Frontline was very popular, and it was one of the few success stories of 2018 for World of Tanks as far as I'm concerned. So the news that it's coming back permanently and regularly is definitely good news. Next up, they're going to be introducing new vehicles, lots of new vehicles. Now, while they haven't ruled out the introduction of a brand new nation, who knows, perhaps the pan-European tech tree, that might still happen. They have definitely announced that they're planning to introduce a whole new line of Swedish medium tanks that are going to incorporate the siege mode that you already see on certain of the Swedish tank destroyers. They're also adding new vehicles. Now, they haven't gone into detail about exactly what they mean by that, but I suspect we're probably looking at wheeled vehicles. Now, we've already seen the introduction of, well, one. You've no doubt seen some YouTube videos of people driving, or live streams of people driving the Panhard EBR, which was a French wheeled, well, was it an armoured car? Was it a scout car? Was it a tank destroyer? Was it an infantry fighting vehicle? Was it an armoured fighting vehicle? Who knows? It's a wheeled vehicle, sporting the same oscillating turret and gun as seen on the French AMX series of tanks. And it seemed to be fairly good. So I wouldn't be at all surprised to see more wheeled vehicles like the Panhard EBR appearing in the various different national tech trees at some point during 2019. They also talked about new game mechanics, and point blank refused to elaborate on exactly what it was they meant by that, so your guess is as good as mine. But one of the things that they did mention, and went into some detail about, was how they're planning on rebalancing what they would like us to call special ammunition. What's special ammunition, Jingles? It's gold ammo. Yep, they're talking about changing how gold ammunition works. Now, this is not something that I was expecting to see ever happen in World of Tanks, and yet it is going to. Now, what exactly happens is still open to speculation. But they have announced that, initially at least, what they're going to be experimenting with, and obviously it's going to be subject to testing and evaluation, but the initial plan is to reduce the amount of damage that gold ammunition does by anything between 25 to 30%. Now that's a huge change. And they're doing this because, well, do I really need to spell it out? World of Tanks, if you have no idea what you're doing or how you plan on doing it, just press the 2 key load the skill, and bingo! Instantly, and with no effort on your behalf, you're now a better player. Oh no, what's that? You're in a medium tank and you only have 180mm of penetration on your gun firing armor-piercing ammunition, and there's a hull down heavy in front of you? Just press the 2 key and become a better player. Got yourself stuck into a dumbass position, pinned down behind a tiny piece of cover, going to get slaughtered if you attempt to relocate to where you should have been in the first place if you hadn't followed the lemming train? Just press the 2 key, and from the safety of your hull down position, you can instantly be a better player. Yep, gold ammo is going to get sorry, they want us to call it special ammo because they feel that terms like gold ammo and premium ammo are no longer appropriate. Well, much though I do respect your willingness to try to improve the game wargaming, as long as you can still buy an advantage in World of Tanks, and this isn't going away, as long as you can still buy an advantage in World of Tanks, I'm going to continue to call it gold ammo. However, you do have to at least give them some credit for trying, and I do believe that the proposed changes to gold ammo, reducing the amount of damage that they do on average between 25 to 30%, will make the game better. Not a lot better, but better. And to be quite frank, with the state that World of Tanks has gotten itself into over the course of the last year, at this point, any kind of improvement I am more than willing to take. So how is this going to make things better, if at all? Well, it will. It's not going to make the slightest bit of difference to those derps that just have nothing but gold loaded on all of their tanks and leave a brick on their 2 key the second they hit the battle button. You know these kind of players exist. Wargaming knows that these kind of players exist because these kind of players have been keeping wargaming afloat and profitable for years. We've all been there, driving our Comet around Prokhorovka while there's an E75 spamming APCR at us from the other side of the map. These players exist. That's not going to change. They're still going to be spamming gold at everything, regardless of whether or not it's the best possible choice, because thinking is hard. Rebalancing gold ammunition like this so it actually does less damage is going to have 2 immediate beneficial effects, one for you and one for wargaming. It's going to be good for wargaming because the derps who do fire gold at everything are going to have to fire a damn sight more gold at everything, 25 to 30% more, in order to achieve the kind of results that they're enjoying now. And that's going to be more expensive for them, and that's good for wargaming. And it's going to be good for you because as you're driving around Prokhorovka in your Comet, laughing your arse off at the idiot on the other side of the map in the E75 firing APCR at you, when he hits you, he's going to be doing 25 to 30% less damage. So it's really a win-win situation. This is really only going to affect the derps and the people getting shot at by the derps. It's not going to be good for the derps, and it's going to be good for the people getting shot at by them. Competent players are probably not going to see a huge amount of difference when and if this change goes through, because competent players already select the appropriate ammunition for the circumstances in which they find themselves. They don't just fire gold at light tanks, thinly armoured tank destroyers and artillery. Instead, they load the high explosive, because it's going to do more damage. If they find themselves facing a target that they can penetrate with regular armour piercing, they already fire regular armour piercing, because it's a damn sight cheaper than spamming gold. And if they find themselves facing a target that they can't reliably penetrate with a regular armour piercing, they look for and aim at weak spots, because it's a damn sight cheaper than just spamming the gold. And only in those circumstances where they have no other option, and gold is the preferred choice, that's when they fire the gold. They're going to have to fire more in order to get themselves out of the kind of situations where gold ammunition is their only choice, but it's not going to make that much of a difference to a player who understands how the game works, knows how to drive their tank, understands where the weak spots on the enemy vehicles are, and knows how to aim for them. So while personally I'd love nothing more than to see gold ammunition removed from World of Tanks entirely, I have to be realistic, that's never going to happen. Or if it does, they would first have to rebalance the armour of every tank in the game in order to compensate for the removal of gold ammo. This, however, is at least a very welcome step in the right direction. On the subject of rebalancing vehicles, there are a couple of tanks a preliminary list of vehicles that are definitely up for rebalancing in 2019. Some of them on this list because of the proposed changes to gold ammunition. Others on this list because, frankly, they've been underperforming for a while and are in need of some buffs. We're talking about machines like the E100, the IS4, the Leopard 1, the STB1 and the Kranvan. Not entirely sure what's wrong with the STB1, although the gun could probably do with a bit of an accuracy buff, but I think it's high time the Leopard 1 received a bit of love because it's been power crept to hell since its introduction, and we're probably seeing the introduction of some weak spots to the E100 and the IS4 as a result of the gold ammo rebalance. Time will tell. All in all, I think 2019 has the potential to shape up to be a very good year for World of Tanks. And I think if you are a World of Tanks player and you care about the game, even if you don't 100% agree with the list of proposed changes that I've mentioned so far, and there are some others, but they're relatively minor in comparison to what I've talked about, you at least have to take some kind of consolation and encouragement from the fact that wargaming are not just continuing to allow the game to stagnate and decline while monetizing the bejesus out of it in order to just try to make as much money as they possibly can out of the game before it keels over and dies a natural death. They're not doing that. They've acknowledged that there are still some significant problems with the game, and they are at least trying to fix them and improve the game going forward into 2019. I do think they could be doing more at the lower tiers, however, to try to retain the new players that they do bring into the game. And again, this is something that I'm in 100% agreement with Quickybaby on. He's recently begun conducting an experiment where he's started playing World of Tanks from Tier 1 as a 100% free-to-play player, because that's how you should be able to play World of Tanks. It is supposed to be a free-to-play game, after all. And he has encountered some significant problems, and I'm not talking about just the tanks being bad at Tiers 2, 3 and 4. There's a huge amount of seal clubbing going on at the lower tiers. People with thousands of games played at Tiers 2 and 3, for example, where they quite literally just feast on the tiers of newbies. And it's important not just that you retain the higher tier players in your game, which is what most of the changes that Wargaming have announced for 2019 seem to be focused on. It's obviously also important that you attract new players to the game. But it's very important that you retain those new players by giving them a fun experience at the low tiers in order to grow them into higher tier players who may be persuaded to start forking out for some of those Tier 8 premium tanks that you keep selling. Now, I'm sure that those of us who have been playing World of Tanks for a couple of years now have completely forgotten what it actually used to be like at Tier 2, 3 and 4 if you were trying to play World of Tanks as a free-to-play game. Unlocking a new tank and putting a 50% crew in it, driving forward into battle, and never seeing the tank that killed you because your crew was so bad they could barely see outside of the tank. And on those rare occasions when you did actually see a target to shoot at, watching your shells go nowhere near the target because the gunner was terrible. You know, this is the new player experience in World of Tanks, and it's really bad. it's almost comically bad. Oh, but Jingles, there's all kinds of resources out there on YouTube and various different blogs that exist purely to educate as well as entertain World of Tanks players. I believe you may know a thing or two about this yourself. Well, yeah, sure, but the majority of people playing a free-to-play game aren't really that interested in getting better. They just want to, well, you know, in the case of World of Tanks, drive around, shoot things, and hopefully see things explode. If you want to teach them how to not suck quite as much as they do, so hopefully they don't end up as a top tier tank in your team in a higher tier battle, you can't rely on them to go out there and educate themselves, because the sad fact is most people probably aren't going to bother. You have to give them feedback in the game to explain why whatever happened to them happened. Now, I have to admit World of Tanks has taken some good steps in the right direction here with the introduction of the hit indicators. For example, letting you know what fired at you from what angle, and how much damage it could have done, and whether or not it penetrated, bounced, and so on and so on and so on. This is all a good step in the right direction, because for a lot of players, probably the majority down at the lower tiers, they just roll forward into battle, die, and have no idea why. War Thunder with the kill camera, something like that would be a very welcome addition into World of Tanks. But there are so many more things that they could be doing to try to educate new players, so that when they do roll forward into battle and instantly die and have no idea why, they don't just think, oh, this is bullshit, oh, that's it, I'm uninstalling and never playing this again. Instead, they go, oh, right, so that's what happened. Okay, that didn't work. Maybe I won't do that again. So, while on the one hand, I have to give credit to Wargaming for acknowledging that there are problems with the game, and at least trying, and hopefully fixing the problems that exist. But there's still so much more that they could, and probably should be doing. Nevertheless, at least as far as World of Tanks is concerned, 2019 is looking like it definitely has the potential to be a good year. So, what about World of Warships? Well, the number one question that people have been asking me about World of Warships this year, and in the last couple of months of last year as well, has got absolutely nothing to do with the aircraft carrier rebalance. It's been, Jingles, when are we going to get you in-game as a captain? And the answer to that is this year, I think. I really don't know. First, for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, a little background. I'll try to keep this as quick as possible. Last year, World of Warships ran a community contributor contest, the grand prize of which was for the winning community contributor to be flown to St. Petersburg to record a whole bunch of voice lines and have their likeness put into the game as a playable ship captain. I won the contest. It was called The Ring. Thank you very much to all of the other community contributors who voted to me, and thank you to all of you for your support during the contest. And then everything went really quiet. Now I suspect what was going on here. Well, if we're being 100% honest here, I don't suspect anything. I know for a fact that all the World of Warships team wanted to do was have an event that was going to be fun for the various different communities of all the community contributors. The problem for World of Warships was that they kind of underestimated just how seriously a lot of people in the community were going to take this whole thing. And they kind of made a rod for their own back with the whole formula for the first iteration of the Ring contest that just didn't work at all. And so they bit the bullet. They said, right, look, this isn't working. We're going to do the whole thing again. And they did. And I won. And they were just really glad that it was all over and done with. Because all they wanted to do was something fun for the community. And yeah, it was, eventually. And in, that respect, they succeeded. But at the same time, take it from me, you're never going to see anything like this happen again. Because it was just too much trouble. So they're happy that it's over and done with. And at some point, I will be going to St. Petersburg to record my voice lines. When? I have no idea. They've approached me once after the conclusion of the contest to ask me if there were any dates near the beginning of 2019 in the first couple of months of the year when I wouldn't be free to go to St. Petersburg to do the various different voice lines that I'm going to have to record. And I'm pretty easy, really. Any time suits me. Other than that, I haven't heard anything back from them. But, well, it is the Russian New Year. I think they're all back at work today. So, Happy New Year, World of Warships. Phil, Earl Grey, I know you're either listening to this video or somebody who works for you is listening to this video and the news is going to be on your desk very soon. I haven't forgotten. And neither has my community. So, whenever you're ready is good for me. People have been asking what kind of perks would a Captain Jingles have. I don't know that they're actually putting me in the game as a legendary captain, like a Sirocco Yamamoto or Bill Halsey. In fact, I suspect they probably aren't. So, some of your suggestions were quite funny. The surprise butt sex perk, double damage when firing at an enemy from behind, for example. But I don't think I'm going into the game as, the kind of captain that has special in-game perks like that. I mean, I might be, but Probably not. Nevertheless, I am going to do my utmost to ensure that any Captain Jingles in the game does at least incorporate certain things about me other than my voice and my likeness and maybe some of my catchphrases, but also some of the things about me that, how can I put this, we've all come to treasure over the years that I've been doing these videos. Things like my apparent inability to ever correctly identify a ship or a tank. So here's one of the things that I want to see, and you never know. I think we can sneak this past them. You know when you're playing World of Warships and you sink an enemy cruiser, and the captain reports, "We sank an enemy cruiser." Yeah, or if it's a battleship, "We sank an enemy battleship." What I want to see is if you're playing World of Warships with Captain Jingles on the bridge of your warspite and you sink an enemy destroyer, Captain Jingles reports, "We sank an enemy cruiser." Or, you know, a battleship or an aircraft carrier, anything other than what it was you actually sank. I think that would be fantastic. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And if you have any other ideas, then by all means let me know in the comments of this video. Now, as for how you're going to get your hands on a Captain Jingles, again, I cannot with 100% certainty guarantee that this is going to be the case, but I'm pretty sure that you're not going to be expected to buy a Captain Jingles. I'm not going to be on sale in the premium shop, I think. I'm pretty sure. Instead, I'm 99% certain that I'm going to be unlockable via an in-game mission, open to everybody, or a series of missions, but probably not something as long as the campaigns to unlock a legendary commander like Isoroku Yamamoto or Bill Halsey. Instead, it'll just be a relatively short series of missions that anybody can complete, the end result of which will be your very own Captain Jingles to misidentify ships for you. When you're taking your favourite, British of course, well, you never know, ship out for battle in World of Warships. The only thing that I really don't know at this point is how soon you can expect that to happen. So, once again, Leicester Studios, World of Warships developers, I hope you all had a great new year. Welcome back to work. No, we haven't forgotten. Get in touch. Right, anyway, where does that leave us? Well, since we're talking about World of Warships, how about those aircraft carriers? Yep, it looks like 2019 is shaping up to be the year of the aircraft carrier in World of Warships. Before we go on, quickly, because this subject has really been done to death, what was wrong with aircraft carriers, and why did World of Warships need to completely change the way they work from the top to bottom? And the answer is twofold. An aircraft carrier could scout better than any other ship in the game by using its aircraft, while at the same time preventing destroyers from capping by spotting them, dive bombing them, torpedoing them, simply hovering fighters over the top of them in order to keep them spotted so the rest of the team could wipe them out, effectively denying capture control to the enemy team, while at the same time simultaneously striking enemy ships with torpedoes and bombs and preventing the enemy aircraft carrier from doing the same thing to their own team. It really was far too much power to have in the hands of one player on the team. Luckily, perhaps depending on your perspective or which team you were on, unluckily, the overwhelming majority of aircraft carrier players sucked. It was too complicated. There was too much to keep track of at the same time for anybody to be truly effective and to be able to fully exploit the ridiculous amount of power that an aircraft carrier was capable of bringing to the battle. Now, if that had been all that the problem was, they could have probably gotten by with incremental changes and patches and improvements because, well, let's face it, if everybody playing aircraft carriers in World of Warships was equally bad, there's no skill gap. So it's not really... I mean, yeah, okay, you probably want to make aircraft carrier gameplay a little bit more accessible while still retaining the tactical complexity, but if by doing that you're just making it so complicated that nobody can really be very good at it, you can get by with that because nobody's really very good at it. It's not great, but, well, that wasn't the case. Because the second problem with aircraft carriers was that some people were very good at it. Not many. Not many at all. But remember, we're talking about an insane amount of power to have in the hands of one player on your team, if they're any good. Most of them weren't. But when one of them is, and they're on the enemy team, you've probably lost the match before it's even begun. And that was what was happening. There were other problems as well, of course, but none that really necessitated a huge, radical, complete redo of the way aircraft carriers work. I have personally seen somebody in a full anti-air spec Tier 10 cruiser with their defensive fire up get struck and sunk by an enemy carrier. The fact that they were full anti-air spec while running the defensive fire consumable just didn't make any difference. Because it's pretty much always been the case with aircraft carriers and World of Warships that if they want to sink you, they're going to sink you. It was just a question of how many aircraft they were prepared to expend in order to do it. Well, these, in a nutshell, were the reasons for the aircraft carrier rebalance. So, over Christmas and the New Year, I jumped onto the public test server and had a go with the rebalanced aircraft carriers. And remember, if you're going to rebalance aircraft carriers, you can't just leave it at that. You also have to rebalance all of the anti-air side of the game as well. So I also had a go at playing high-tier, full anti-air spec cruisers. And in fact, that's pretty much what most people were doing on the test server. It was just AA cruisers and carriers. Well, mostly it was just carriers. So it's not I mean, the test server is the test server. What happens on the test server isn't usually indicative of what you can expect to see happening on the live server, but you can draw certain conclusions based on what you've experienced. You can get an idea of how things are likely to work when it finally migrates to the live server. And the first thing that I have to say is I want to go on record as stating that, in my opinion, what they have done with aircraft carriers on the test server in the carrier rebalance is way better than what we currently have with aircraft carriers on the live server. It's just better for the game, because they have managed to tackle the number one problem, which was having far too much power in the hands of one player on your team if they were any good. And they've also managed to successfully, in my opinion, tackle the number two problem, the skill gap between the overwhelming majority who sucked at carriers or just weren't that good, and the very small minority who were very good at it. Because rather than having to juggle control between multiple different squadrons at the same time, being everywhere on the map and doing everything on the map at the same time, which, unless you've got the reflexes of a rattlesnake on crack, most of us just couldn't do, now you set a course for your carrier, and the carrier player then takes control of no more, and it's direct control, of no more than one aircraft squadron at a time. So even if you were capable of controlling multiple different squadrons in multiple different locations all at the same time, that's no longer part of the gameplay. Now, one squadron at a time is all that you get. And most of us should be able to manage that without too many problems, because we're already kind of used to doing that when we're playing our destroyers, cruisers and battleships. So, in my opinion at least, they have fixed the two biggest problems that they had with aircraft carriers. Too much power in the hands of one player on your team, and too big a skill gap between most of us and the few who were actually quite good at playing aircraft carriers. What I am not telling you, however, is that it's all perfect, it works flawlessly, and all of the cruiser, destroyer, battleship and aircraft carrier players skip merrily hand in hand through the fields singing songs together, because there's still some work needs doing. And that shouldn't really come as any surprise, because that's why it's the test server and not the live server. But I still have some concerns. Chief amongst them being that it still doesn't matter whether or not you're sailing, for example, a full anti-aircraft spec Des Moines with a full anti-aircraft skill captain with your defensive fire consumable up. If the enemy carrier decides that they want to sink you, it is going to happen. It might not happen instantly, But it is going to happen. It's just a question of how long they're prepared to wait and how many aircraft they're prepared to throw away in order to do it. Now, I find it's actually worse in this respect on the test server than it is currently when in the same situation on the live server, because you can, at least on the live server, hold out the slim ray of hope that you will eventually deplane the enemy aircraft carrier, because they have a limited hangar capacity. There are only so many aircraft they can throw at you. With the new carrier gameplay, this doesn't happen. They have an unlimited amount of aircraft. Although they can't just continue throwing torpedo bombers at you, for example. While they don't have a limited number of torpedo bomber squadrons, once you've completely shot down, for example, their torpedo bomber squadron, it has to regenerate on their flight deck, so they may have to come at you with attack planes or dive bombers. But the torpedo bombers are regenerating, and they will be coming back at some point. I've also noticed a startling disparity between the various different tiers. For example, I played a game where I was in the USS Seattle, Tier 9 American cruiser, a game in which there were 3 Tier 10 carriers on the enemy team. And they basically went for me first, because I was Tier 9. Never mind the fact that it was a full anti-air build USS Seattle AA defense cruiser. During the course of the entire game, I think I survived 3 attack waves before I was eventually sunk. But this is an AA cruiser, even using my defensive fire consumable, because the carriers were 1 tier higher. During the course of that entire battle, I only shot down 6 aircraft. And it worked the other way too. I was playing the Japanese Tier 8 carrier in a Tier 10 battle, and I just couldn't get my aircraft through the defensive anti-aircraft fire around the Tier 10 battleships. Now, I mention this to illustrate that they're not there yet, but at the same time you have to remember that all we're really talking about here are numbers. Right? This isn't an inherent problem in the aircraft carrier rebalance gameplay. In order to fix this, they don't have to redesign the game for aircraft carriers from the ground up again. These are just number tweaks. But I do mention it just in case you're getting the impression that everything's fantastic with the carrier rebalance, because it isn't. At the same time, though, you have to bear in mind that all we're really talking about here is adjusting a number value in a spreadsheet somewhere to tweak somebody's anti-aircraft firepower under a certain circumstance. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with the gameplay. Now, whether you enjoy the gameplay or not, that's an entirely different and entirely subjective matter. But I do believe that it is better for the game than what we currently have. They wanted to make aircraft carrier gameplay more accessible to a much larger number of players, rather than just having a tiny elite who utterly dominated every game they got into, unless they had the misfortune of facing an aircraft carrier on the enemy team who was every bit as good as they were. And in that respect, they've definitely succeeded. Anybody should be able to jump into one of the new carriers and have some idea of what they're doing right from the word go. And providing they're not completely brain dead, at least be moderately effective and not just be a liability to their team. While at the same time, if you are any good or particularly good, you should still be able to have enough of an impact to help swing the balance of the match in favour of your team, rather than completely dominating it, as is the case that we see with the aircraft carriers on the live server at the moment. It's not perfect, not by a long shot. There's still a lot of tweaking that needs doing, but I do think they're on the right path. The biggest issue, for those of you who don't play World of Warships but who do watch World of Warships videos, the biggest problem that you're going to experience if you're watching the new aircraft carrier gameplay videos here on YouTube, or you're watching somebody play live on Twitch, it's still as dull as dishwater to watch. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's certainly prettier to look at than is currently the case, you know, when you're watching somebody move markers around a map in a top-down view, which is current carrier gameplay. But it's not the same as watching somebody play a cruiser, destroyer, or battleship well. It's just a little bit more interesting than watching somebody play artillery in World of Tanks. You know, there's none of that edge of the seat, nail biting, oh my god, torpedo beats moments that you experience watching somebody getting chased by Shimakaze's wall of skill in a cruiser. None of that. Oh no. No, it's kind of just, okay, here's my squadron. I'm on my way to the target. I'm on my way to the target. Oh, I've spotted a destroyer. Oh wait, no, there's a battleship. Okay, I'm lining up on the battleship. Oh, I'm running into the flak. Some of my aircraft are taking damage. One of the engines is smoking. Torpedoes away. Oh, I missed him. Alright. Go around again. Oh, I hit him this time. Okay, my aircraft have been shot down. Let's launch another squadron. And that's it. I mean, it's... I don't think I'm going to be showing... It's going to have to be a truly exceptional game to make it worth a video on YouTube. I mean, you never know. I hope to be wrong, but I don't think I am. That doesn't mean it's not fun to play. I mean, it is. But it's just not especially interesting to watch. I am glad that it is much more simple to get to grips with than current carrier gameplay, however, because, well, it's like I said earlier. The overwhelming majority of players, whether it's World of Tanks, World of Warships, or whatever, in online games, particularly free-to-play games, they just don't really care too much about getting better at the game. So, you know, if you're rebalancing your carrier gameplay, you have to make it simple and easy to get into, while still trying to maintain that balancing act of retaining enough tactical complexity so that a good player can make more of a difference without being overpowered. I mean, I talked earlier about how I think World of Tanks needs to do more with positive feedback to the player, particularly at low levels when they're doing something right, and negative feedback to the player, you know, beyond just, oh, you got blown up, back to the garage and try again, to let a player know when they're doing something wrong. And I do think it's important that that feedback is in the game, that you don't rely on the player to go looking for feedback on YouTube or on a blog, for example, in order to learn how things work and actively get better, because most, not all, most players are never going to bother because they just don't really care about getting better. They just want to sail their ship around, fire their guns and blow stuff up. And they're perfectly happy doing that. You have to accept that most of the players on your team and the enemy team are going to fall into that category, and it's pointless getting angry about it. I mean, I like to think that most of you do want to learn. This is exactly why, while I'm no expert on World of Tanks the way Circumflexes and Quickybaby are, and I'm no expert on World of Warships the way people like Flamu, Flambass and Isolate are, but I do at least try to impart some kind of knowledge and information in my videos, as well as providing entertainment value. And I do think you'll appreciate that, even though I hope most of you already know most of the things that I'm pointing out in my World of Warships and World of Tanks videos, but there are probably a whole bunch of you who don't know the things that I'm pointing out and appreciate the information. But most people just don't care. They really don't. I mean, World of Warships does a fantastic video series called How It Works, which explains in great detail, while at the same time being easy to understand, well, what it says on the tin, how it works, flooding mechanics, fire mechanics, spotting mechanics, armor penetration, everything. They explain it all. The supreme irony of it all, however, is that the kind of people that most need to watch these videos are the ones who are never going to go looking for them in the first place. And unfortunately, we play with them all the time. I'll give you an example of the sort of thing I'm talking about. Just last week I can't even remember what ship I was playing. Doesn't matter. But anyway, I'm dead. I was in my Gremmy Ashki. So it was a tier 7 match, tier 5 destroyer. So I'm bottom tier. I'm in a tier 7 match, and after I died, we have 3 ships left alive. One's our carrier, who is being pursued by an enemy destroyer while being fired upon from long range by an enemy Nagato battleship. Another was an Omaha class cruiser, tier 5, AFK, and had been AFK since the start of the match. And our other surviving ship was a top tier battleship, King George V, Tier 7 British battleship, who had 41,000 health remaining and was fighting a Russian Tier 5 cruiser, the Kirov, who only had 11,000 health remaining and was 10 kilometres away, broadside on to the King George V when I switched the camera to watch what they were doing. So, top tier battleship against bottom tier cruiser, broadsiding the battleship with a quarter of the battleship's health. Who do you think won that fight? Spoiler alert, it wasn't the battleship. Don't worry, I'm fake laughing. Only the tears are real. It was just such a textbook example of how to not play a battleship. I actually recorded it, but I decided not to show it on YouTube because, well, what would be the point? They're not going to get any better. They weren't a new player, by the way. 1,600 games played, 92% of those games in battleships. Yep, you're stereotypical. I know I make fun of them on YouTube, but these players actually exist. Dumb battleship players. 1,600 games played, 92% in battleships with a 45% win rating, which isn't the worst I've seen, but it's pretty bad. On average, this player manages to sink half a ship in every game they play. But it's pointless, absolutely pointless getting mad about it or expecting them to get any better, because this is exactly, I mean, they've been playing long enough, 1,600 games played, exactly the kind of person that if they wanted to get any better at the game, they would have by now. And that's why it doesn't matter how mad we get about it, how much information we put out there in order to educate players to be better at the games that we like to play and be good at. Most people are just never going to bother. And in this particular example, why should they? Because, yeah, you guessed it, by experience earned, third best player on my team. They probably thought that was a pretty good game. Oh no. God, please make it stop. I'm so glad. I mean, people who stream World of Warships for a living. Seriously, right. If you're watching this video, and I know some of you do, if you stream World of Warships for a living, I genuinely want to know, how the fuck do you summon the will to go on? And keep doing it for hours and hours and hours in the face of this. I just don't understand how you can do it. Because 2 or 3 games like that and I'm done for the day. That's it. Screw it. I'm going to go and watch Man in the High Castle on Netflix or something. I genuinely have no idea how you do it. Because, I mean, I just know. I couldn't. So let's hear from all the live streamers out there. How the hell do you put up with shit like that? Anyway, well, we're rapidly coming to the end of this mammoth bumper edition of Mingles with Jingles, the first of 2019. And before we go, I just wanted to share with you a few completely random and almost totally irrelevant thoughts that popped into my head during the course of the week. I really do sometimes think of the strangest things for no apparently good reason. And this week I thought I'd share a couple of them with you. I don't know why, but mostly it seems to happen when I'm making coffee. Well, anyway, this week I'm making coffee, and the thought just popped into my head. For some reason I'm thinking about the Matrix movies. Now, I don't know if you recall the Matrix movies, but in the underground human civilization of Zion, they were defended by these things that were called armoured personnel units, and here's a picture of one now. Can anybody tell me why it's called an armoured personnel unit? Surely it should be called an unarmoured personnel unit. I mean, it's about as unarmoured as it's possible to get. And the thing is, it wouldn't have been hard to put some armour on it. So why didn't they? See, these are the kind of questions that pop into my head when I'm making coffee. Another thing that just kind of popped into my head this week as I was making coffee, although this time it's not so much of a question as an observation. For some reason I was thinking about classic science fiction. Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon, Quatermass, Doctor Who, things like that. And a startling difference between British and American science fiction suddenly revealed itself to me. It was something that I'd never really noticed before. And Flash Gordon was the example that popped into my head. Now, Flash Gordon is a football player, I believe, who ends up saving the planet Earth from Ming the Merciless, and he's assisted by his girlfriend, Dale Ardent, whose sole purpose appears to have been looking nice and saying things like, "Oh Flash, we only have 24 hours to save the Earth," and the brains of the operation, Dr. Hans Zarkov, who builds the rocket ship that takes them to the planet Mongo, where he has to fight Ming the Merciless. If Flash Gordon had been a British movie, Hans Zarkov would have been the hero, and Flash would have just been the dumb but strong sidekick. All British science fiction heroes, whether that be Professor Bernard Quatermass from the movies in the 50s and the 60s, or Doctor Who from the 1960s all the way to the present day, the British hero has always been the scientist. And the sidekick has been the fighter pilot, or the football player, the dumb jock, who's basically good in a fight, and that's about it. But in American classic science fiction, it's exactly the other way around. Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon, hell, even Luke Skywalker. But then you move on 30 or 40 years and suddenly the sidekick starts becoming the hero in American movies. The scientist is the one who saves the day. Jurassic Park, Godzilla, the Roland Emmerich movie, not the more recent one. Hell, Independence Day. Okay, Will Smith's character was a dumb jock fighter pilot, but he was assisted by and on equal footing with Jeff Goldblum's mathematician. He wasn't the sidekick, he was the co-star. So who's the hero in British movies these days? Ironically, it's usually an American. Because the movies get made with American money, and if there's not an American in it, Americans won't watch it. So we haven't quite come full circle, but we're getting there. Even more recently, in American cinema, the hero is either Chinese or the movie's set in China, presumably for exactly the same reasons why the British cast Americans in the lead roles in their movies. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And that is it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. I know it is weird, some of the things that I think of sometimes, but, well, it amuses me, and hopefully it's amused you too, because that's all we've got time for. I hope you've enjoyed it. Here's looking forward to a great 2019, and I am certainly looking forward to the new Subnautica game and the Cyberpunk 2077 game, although God knows when they're going to arrive. And as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.